Test one. I am here. 1, 2, 3. All right. Good morning. We are coming together for our Sunday morning Bible class. If you're joining us online, thank you for being here as well. We are plodding through the Gospel of Matthew. Last week we finished chapter 17, and we ended up with Jesus talking about taxes. And this week we're starting in chapter 18. And there's going to be a lot of these that, like much of Matthew, are very familiar to us. But sometimes that familiarity makes us miss part of what's going on. We've heard it so many times, we've read it so many times, that we think we know what it says, and we go ahead and put it in our head before we ever get there. And so we're going to walk through this and look at some things. 18 verse 1, at that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Now, we don't know what they're asking. I think personally that they're thinking about succession. Jesus just got through telling them not long ago that he was going to go to Jerusalem and the Son of Man's going to be killed and yeah, he talks about and then he'll be raised, but they're not thinking that he's going to be raised after 3 days, because they're thinking he's going to be raised at the end of the age. And so they're thinking, okay, we believe that you're the Messiah. We believe you're the chosen one. You're going in here and you're going to do this thing, and then they're going to kill you. So who's going to be in charge after you're gone? Who's the greatest in the kingdom? Who's going to be the one who's going to take over? Now, I don't know. They could have been just, arguing amongst themselves, as people do. Peter, James, and John may have been like, well, we got to meet Elijah and Moses. You guys were down here at the bottom of the hill. Y'all aren't part of the elite super apostles. I don't know. They could have been. They could have been, I don't know. Who knows? But we can speculate on that all day. But they come to Jesus and they say, "Who is the greatest?" And his response is very, very interesting. Verse 2, he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." Now, we started touching on this last week. I think it's important, first of all, that he does not rebuke them for wanting to be great. He doesn't say, well, you guys, you're worrying about the wrong thing. He doesn't. He says, you want to be great? I'm going to show you how to be great. And here's how you got to be great. You got to be like this kid. Now, that's interesting, because he doesn't say you shouldn't want to be great. He says, you want to be great? This is your ambition? Then here's how you fulfill that ambition in my kingdom. It's going to be different. We talked a little bit last time about how in that society, we don't get it in our society because we live on this side of the cross, but before Jesus, before Christianity, children were not a thing. They didn't, it wasn't as child-centric as our culture is. Children, up until the time of their ascendancy, they really weren't anything. They were in Roman culture especially. Jews were a little bit better because God had put emphasis on the children and the orphans and the widows, and so the Jews had a little bit more than the Romans. The Romans really didn't care. Romans' children were lower than slaves. You could, we talk about our culture and abortion. In Rome, you could kill them up to about 5 or 6, and that was okay. And I mean, it really was not a big deal. Child labor was not a thing. They put them to work, use them for whatever they needed them for. It wasn't a thing. Jason. Right. Well, and they didn't kill all of them. The boys were very because they were heirs, and so a male child was worth a lot. A female child was pretty much worthless. I understand. I got you. But he takes this child and he says this, and he goes on and illustrates it here when he says in verse 4, whoever takes the lowly position of this child, whoever is, and so this is a paradigm flipping statement for them, because being a child is not being great. Being a child is now here's the interesting part here. The Greek word that's translated change in most of our translations, unless you change and become like little children, is root is a strepho. It means to turn around, to turn back. Okay, it's like a word for what? Well, I'm gonna let you fill that in. What's another word that we've encountered in Jesus' teaching that means turn around or turn back? Repent. So he doesn't say repent. He says unless you turn around. Okay, unless you turn around. Now it's the same visual. Unless you turn around and become children, because the other thing is we miss this, but it's not change and become like. I know that's what our English versions say, but the actual thing says unless you turn around and are transformed into children. Now you got to figure out at this point their minds are blown, because we soften it up in our English translations because we want to make it more palatable for us. I can be like a child. I can have a childlike faith. I can work towards being humble like a child. Jesus says unless you're transformed into a child, you're not going to enter the kingdom. And they're going, because I can't let me give you some other usages of the same phrase. Revelation 11:6. You can turn there if you want to, or you can just check it out later. It reads, they have the power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. They have the power to turn the waters into blood. Not turn the waters like blood, not give the waters the same properties as blood, but to turn the waters into blood. That's the same phrase. That it's no longer water, it is now blood. In Matthew 14:5, where we just were, Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. Not because they considered John like a prophet. Not because John had the characteristics of a prophet, but because they considered John a prophet. Matthew 6, verse 10. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not on earth in a similar way to whatever's happening in heaven. Do you get what I'm saying? And I could keep going on this, but in the interest of time, I don't want to, but I wanted you to get a picture of this phrase and how it's used in other places, because it's saying, Jesus is not saying, I want you to be more childlike. He's saying, I want you to become this. Now, if you're a disciple, that's blowing your mind. How do you wrap your head around that? What is Jesus saying? Cody? Right?
So you must forgive, repent,
There you go. It's the same thing Jesus says to Nicodemus in John 4. He tells Nicodemus, unless you're born again, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. It's the same thing. Unless you change and become a baby, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And Nicodemus goes, what, am I supposed to crawl back in my mama's womb? That's crazy. And Jesus says flesh gives birth to flesh, but spirit gives birth to spirit. And that's what he's talking about. He's talking about that new creation. He's talking about unless you become something new. Well, how am I going to become something new? Well, the only way you can is through the Spirit. The only way you can is if God transforms you, because you can't do it yourself. So to be great, you've got to become lowly, and to be lowly, you become a child. All right? Everybody with me so far? That's not, once we get our mind around it, it's not that revolutionary. But then he's just getting wound up because it's going to get really wild from here. Verse 6. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Now, this is not talking about just children anymore. Unless you change and become children, okay, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And anybody who causes one of these children, these disciples who believe in me, to stumble, it'd be better for him to tie a giant heavy thing around his neck and go be drowned in the ocean. That's pretty harsh. So I think we got to figure out what is stumble, right? Because I don't want to be the one to cause stumbling. I don't want to be the one to cause, because Jesus says he's going to come back here in a minute and just be even worse. So what does it mean? How do I cause someone to stumble? Now remember, we always talk about that this always gets into a conversation about pedophiles. That's not what he's talking about. I mean, that's a whole different ball game. I'm not saying that's okay. I'm saying he's talking about unless someone who causes one of these disciples who believes in me to stumble. So we're not just talking about children. We're talking about grown adults who have been transformed into children through the power of the Spirit who are following Jesus. So we're talking about us. How would you cause someone to stumble? And what does stumble mean? Anybody? Nobody's going to jump out on that? Okay, to cause to sin. Chris? To fall into sin. That's a good translation too. To stumble. We don't get, remember now, Jesus used this same terminology about himself not long ago. When Peter was saying, no, Jesus, stop talking about all this crazy talk about getting crucified. That's not going to happen to you. We're not going to let that happen. And he says, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. What does that mean? It meant he was tempting him to do something he wasn't supposed to do. Right? Or he was causing, I think it's also to be causing them to turn away. You buy that? Stumbling, be causing a believer to turn away. Now, if he's talking about disciples, this verse should scare the mess out of us. Because there are a lot of churches who are turning a lot of people away. There are a lot of churches who are causing people who believe in Jesus to stumble. And we can make excuses all day long, and we can say, well, but what about, the bottom line is, Jesus says if we're causing people to turn away from him, if we're causing people to who are disciples, who are believers, to stumble, it'll be better for us if we just drowned ourselves. Cody, you had your hand up. Right. And I don't like offend, because offend kind of is like my feelings hurt. I get what you're saying. You're saying that it's really not even offend as much as it is to turn them away. Because what you're describing is, I tell you, well, you don't understand this. You should be more like me. And then you go, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to do this. I might as well go home. And you don't ever come back. And you know what I'm saying? That's what, and so that's more than offense. Offense is just, I don't know. Everybody in our culture is offended about something nowadays. Seriously, pull up social media. Somebody's mad about something all the time. It just, it's not even worth it. Carry your hands up. Absolutely. That's why I'm saying it's more to cause them to turn away. Because I can't make you sin. I can tempt you. I can help lead you into a situation that we're talking about. I can put, if I have a friend who's an alcoholic and I show up at his house with a 12 pack of beer, I'm causing him to stumble, right? I mean, we get that, but ultimately there is the personal accountability. I'm still the one who does the sin myself. Nobody's twisting my arm and making me sin, Jason. Absolutely. And Julie's your hand up. Ooh. Let me restate that for the folks at home. Julie said, it would also be, since we're talking about children, if we see something that they're doing and not call that out, that is going to lead them into sin, that's going to cause them to stumble. And so in some ways maybe we're not causing to stumble as much as we're not removing the stumbling block. Is that fair? I buy that. The Greek word is skandalizo. You've heard that before, right? Where we get our word scandal. But it literally means to set a snare or to put a snare in front of. What is a snare? A trap, right? If you're, did you ever try to trap rabbits when you were a kid with a snare? We did. We never worked because.
I think that's the same thought as setting someone up to do something.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't think of an example, but I think of the word. Somebody said, "Oh, I was set up. You set me up."
Set me up. Let me read you the actual definition that is in my Greek concordance. To cause a person to begin to distrust and to desert one whom he ought to trust, to cause to fall away. To lose trust, to lose faith. This is bigger than I got my feelings hurt. This is bigger than, whatever. I can tell you stories, and you all can too, about people who have never been back to church because an elder told them they weren't dressed correctly. I can tell you stories, and you can too, about people who've never been back to church because of racism or sexism or judgmentalism or all kind of isms. But they all end up being a millstone. And there was two types of millstones. There's a little millstone you had in the house, that you would use. And then there was the big, gigantic millstone that a donkey turned. That's what he's saying. He's using, the literal translation would be the donkey millstone. We're not going to say that because that sounds stupid. But it's talking about this giant piece of rock that has a hole in the center of it. You just stick your head through that, strap it to your body, and go jump in the ocean. That's the best thing that can happen to you. That's your best case scenario. I mean, that's now, as was the custom of the time, Jesus is using a lot of violent language, a lot of hyperbole, and being very dramatic about this. That was cultural. That's what they did. That it was. Everything was overstated, okay? And so, but he has a habit of whenever he's wound up and serious about something, he will use very violent image to get people's attention, to shake them into paying attention to what he's trying to say. Because he's just getting warmed up here. Look at verse 7. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come. But woe to the person through whom they come. Jesus says troubles are going to come. And woe is really, it's an expression of grief. Okay? We grieve for the world because of the things that cause the world grieves me because of you see why they translate it, whoa, we don't have a word. It doesn't work for us. But it grieves me that there are things in the world that will cause people to stumble. And he says that. And he says, but these things must come. It's going to happen. Jesus never says, regardless of what the prosperity preachers say, that you follow him and everything's going to be roses and you're going to be healthy and wealthy and happy and everything's going to be. He never says that. In fact, he says the exact opposite of that. It's going to get hard. It's going to get rough. You're going to get persecuted. It's not going to be fun. And he says these things must come, but I'm also grieved for the person through whom they come. He's still talking about that person who causes the other person to sin. Troubles will come, and they must come, but it grieves my soul, not just that they come, but for the person through whom they come. Now, you and I both have met Christians, and maybe I'm the only one, but have met Christians who pride themselves on pointing out other people's sins. On not just pointing out other people's sins, but blasting other people about how wrong they are and how right they are. Does that make sense? You know what I'm talking about? The most dramatic example I can think of is the Westboro Baptist people. You know those people? The people who picket soldiers' funerals and stuff, because they're just disgusting. They're just despicable, and it grieves me because they give Christians a bad name. But those people who pride themselves on letting everybody know how wrong everybody else is and how right they are. That's who he's talking about here. And not just that extreme version, but he's talking about those who would cause another, blasting the person who is doing the thing or who is different than us for whatever. You get what I'm saying? Jesus says, "Whoa, I'm grieved for you, because the best thing that could happen to you, person who's doing this, is to be drowned. That's the best case scenario." And then I told you he's just getting warmed up, because we just thought, wow, drowning, that's pretty blatant. But look at verse 8. He's going to go all the way now. "If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. If your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell." Whoa, tell us what you really think, Jesus.
The first time he used the expression life, enter into life.
I don't know. That's a good question. I will have to research that. I don't know off the top of my head. I know that there's only 2 references in Matthew where he mentions hell. This is one of them, and then there's another one's going to come later in the book. Cody?
Is he talking about freedom here and able to make a choice? God's love. With love, we have freedom.
Right. I don't know. This is not the first time we've heard this language. Anybody remember where we've heard him talk about this before? Anybody? This is a softball. You should remember this. Sermon on the Mount. Yes. Where he said, at that time he was talking about sexual sin, and said, if your hand offends you, cut it off. If your eye offends you, pluck it out. Again, he was using that same language. And so if we're reading this, and we all profess to be followers of Christ, and we all profess to do what Jesus says, then why aren't our churches more full of amputees? Isn't that an honest question? Because we got a lot of people who will tell you, well, I believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and we must literally follow it to the letter, or we're all going to hell. And so it's like, so your hand has never caused you to sin. Your eye has never looked at anything inappropriate. I don't buy that. It's not working for me. So maybe, I'm gonna go there because Jesus is inspiring me. But if if people will say that because of what the text says, women are required to remain silent in worship, then why aren't they cutting off their body parts? Because we're literal for one thing and not literal for another thing. I'm just saying, you got it. You can't have it both ways. We're back to that cafeteria style religion, where I like this, so I'm gonna take a little bit of that. I don't like that, so you can keep that. You can keep that amputation stuff, Jesus. I don't want any part of that. When we come to a passage like this, we don't want to take it literally, because we might end up having to pluck my eye out. So why are we literal in some cases, but not in others? Why do we look at some passages and go, well, this is literal and we need to follow this to the letter? And other passages we go, oh, well, that's just hyperbole. He was just using dramatic language to try to make a point. Or we'll say, oh, that was just cultural. You know, we in Churches of Christ pride ourselves on Romans 16:16, because that's the only mention of the name Church of Christ. But it also says greet one another with a holy kiss. We don't do that. But wait a minute, one of them is literal, and it's the same verse. It's literally the same verse, and part of it's literal and part of it's cultural. It's crazy. And our exegesis and we're all over the place. And so why are some things literal and some things not? How do we make the distinction? Jason? Right? I don't think they would have done it then either. So what do we do with that?
Wasn't it against Mosaic law
To dismember yourself.
anyway?
Yes. So that makes it even more complex, because now he's telling them to do something so maybe he's not telling them to do it, right? Maybe it's not a commandment as much as it is trying to make a point. So let's go ahead, Cody. Yes. And this is all in the context of causing others to fall away, to lose faith. Okay? So how can my eye or my hand or my foot cause other people to lose faith? How? Because that's the context here. Now, the other one was about sex, and we don't have to go real far to figure out what he's talking about there. That's we can make that jump. This one's a little bit more difficult. Well, let me circle back around to that, because there's a second thing I want us to notice here. This is not a popular teaching either, so, we're going to step in it. Let's step in all of it. There is a hell. A lot of churches don't teach that anymore. We don't like to talk about that. We don't like to talk about hell because, it's not affirming. It's not life affirming. It's fire and brimstone and awful. And there are places where evil is banished. I mean, if you think about it, that there's Jesus is talking about entering into, right? It's better to enter life maimed than to be thrown into eternal fire. It's better for you to enter life with one eye than to be thrown into the fire of hell. And so, but then later, the second time he mentions hell, he's going to be talking to Pharisees, and he'll say, you travel all over the world to make one convert, and then after you make him a convert, you make him twice the son of hell as you. That he's talking about present tense. It's a hell now. And so you start wrapping our heads around this, and forget everything that you know about hell, because most of what we've been taught about hell does not come from Bible. It comes from Dante. It comes from medieval literature. It comes from Dante's Inferno, and that's where most of our teachings on hell comes from. Because a lot of the things that we believe, well, in heaven too, really, but it's not scriptural. It's not Bible. This is the literal word here is a transliteration of a Hebrew term. What that means is they took a Hebrew word and they respelled it with Greek letters. We do that with, I don't know, adios, and I spell that A-D-I-O-S. That's still not right. How about konnichiwa, okay? Konnichiwa. That's not an English word, but if I was to write it out, right, I would write it with English letters, but that's not how that word is written. It's not written in English letters, but I can't draw those letters to make it in the way it's supposed to be written. And so this is a Hebrew word, Gehenna, and it literally means Valley of Hinnom. That's it. I know, you were hoping for something much more dramatic, right? The Valley of Hinnom. So Jerusalem is not actually a city on a hill. Jerusalem is actually not that high. It's the Mount of Olives and some of the stuff around it is higher. But Jerusalem seems high because it's surrounded by valleys. And one of those valleys is the Valley of Hinnom. You can still go there today. If you want to, if you know, I can make the joke that I would like to go to hell, or at least to Gehenna. You see what I did there? I'd like to visit the Valley of Hinnom at some point in my life, because this was a place of the greatest evil that the Jewish mind could remember. Okay, in way back in, you can look through it through Jeremiah, but the worshipers of Baal had filled this place with the blood of innocents. And Jeremiah is going to describe events that are going to take place in the 7th century in the place of Ben Hinnom. And in Jeremiah, he'll say, because they, the Israelites, have forsaken me and have made an alien place and have burned sacrifices in it to other gods, neither they nor their forefathers nor the kings of Judah had ever known. And because they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent and have built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal, a thing which I never commanded or spoke of, nor did it ever enter my mind. Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when this place will no longer be called Topheth or the valley of Ben Hinnom, but rather the valley of slaughter. Scholars believe that the Molech cult took place in the Valley of Hinnom. The Molech cult, Molech was a Canaanite god, and a Canaanite god that demanded child sacrifice. And the Manasseh is one of the ones of the kings that was a big follower of Molech, and he set up these altars to Molech. And the primary place where he did that was in the Valley of Hinnom. And so on those altars, they lit fires and they put children and they burned children as offerings to this god Molech. This so enrages Yahweh, God, that he says, I'm going to send some people to you. I'm sending another nation. They're going to destroy you. And they're going to kill every single one of you in this city. And then they're going to throw the bodies in that same ravine, in the same fires that you set for these children. Now, this is not going to happen until a long time later. But it does happen. And so they come in and in this place I will ruin. I'm sorry, we're back in Jeremiah. In this place I will ruin the plans of Judah and Jerusalem. I will make them fall by the sword before their enemies, at the hands of those who want to kill them, and I will give their carcasses as food to the birds and the wild animal. I will devastate this city and make it an object of horror and scorn. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff because of all its wounds. I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and daughters, and they will eat one another's flesh, because their enemies will press the siege so hard against them to destroy them. So when the siege finally comes against Jerusalem, and all the battle happens, when the battle's over, there's all these dead Israelites. And what do they do with them? They throw them in the Valley of Hinnom, and they burn the bodies in the same place where the children were sacrificed, this place of evil. And so that's the, now, I'm not saying that that's literally hell, okay? So don't get me, I'm not giving us a get out of hell free card. I'm saying Jesus is trying to use some kind of metaphor, some kind of something that they can wrap their minds around. Because you and I can't wrap our minds around, right? And so he's saying, you're going to be cast out. You're going to be cast out of the presence of God. Who causes these people? I mean, these people, how do they get thrown into the fire? Well, because of the sin, because of the things that they've done. How do they get, who lit the fires? They did. It's not like God creates this place of torment and is just waiting for somebody to mess up so he can throw them in there. You hear me say all the time, God doesn't send people to hell. We send ourselves to hell. Because when we refuse God, when we turn away, remember that's the context here we're still talking about, causing someone to lose faith, to lose trust. When we turn away from that, right? When we reject the salvation, the love, the grace of God, then we have removed ourselves from his presence. The only way we can come into his presence is through his grace by being washed in the blood of Jesus, right? Because I said a couple weeks ago, it's like trying to put tissue paper in the sun. Sin can't come into contact with a holy God. And we have too much sin in us so that if we come into God's presence, I mean, that's why in the Old Testament, every time God appeared, somebody died, right? Because, and every instance where an angel or something appears, the first thing they say is, don't be afraid. The reason they said that is because anytime God or an angel appeared, somebody died. It wasn't a good thing. It wasn't. And so, of Hinnom, this becomes a phrase for the judgment of God. And so, it's not that there is no hell. It's that hell is worse than we can imagine. God is love. God is light. The fruits of the Spirit are what? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those are what the Spirit, and remember that if you look at that passage up in Galatians, it doesn't say fruits, it says fruit. So he's describing all those things as being, this is what it's like to live in the Spirit. It's one thing, it's not a checklist. Okay, you with me here? All good things are from God. So all the love, all the joy, everything that we have that makes our life worth living is from God. To turn away from God is to go to a place where none of that exists. And we can't even describe that. Jesus says the closest I can get is to show you this place of evil, this place of torment, this place where the worst thing in Israel's history happened. That's the best I can give you. That's the closest I can get to what it's like to be in this place. And you're in this place because you turned away. You're not in this place because God wants to torture you. You're in this place because you refused the grace and the love of God. Cody's been patient and I've been preaching, so let me let you in. Absolutely. Exactly. And so, that's why I usually have this thing tucked in up there. So, how do we make sense of this? It's better for you to be crippled than to be thrown into Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom. Look at what he does here. He uses the hand, the foot, and the eye. Okay? Three modes, if you will, of Jewish life. If you want to understand this, go back and read through Proverbs and mark every time the hand, the foot, or the eye is mentioned. Okay? It's not just a literal meaning. He's borrowing from Jewish scripture because they all get this because they're steeped in this. I'm going to read you a few of them. Proverbs 6:13. a troublemaker and a villain who goes about with a corrupt mouth, who winks maliciously with his eye, signals with his feet, and motions with his fingers. You see that? The hand, the foot, and the eye. Proverbs 4:25-27. Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths of your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. Again, that was the eye and the foot. Proverbs 10, verse 4. Idle hands make one poor, but diligent hands bring wealth. Again, the hand. Verse 9 and 10 of that same chapter. He who walks in integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will be found out. He who winks the eye causes grief, and foolish lips will come to ruin. The hand, the foot, and the eye. And so this is not actually about physical. The eye in Jewish thought is what I'm looking at, my vision, how I look at, in this case, we're talking about other believers, how I look at other people. Do I look at them with grace? Do I look at them as God looks at them? Or do I look at them in judgment? The foot, in this context, in Jewish thought, is the path that I'm treading, where I'm going. Now remember, we're talking metaphorical. This is where you're going. The hand is what you're doing. Where you're going, what you're doing, and how you look at people, how you look at the world. Your eye, your hand, and your foot. How you look at the world, what you're doing, and where you're going. And so he says, if the way you look at people is causing you to sin, you need to pluck out your eyes and look at them a different way. If what you're doing to people is causing them to lose faith, then you need to cut your hands off so you'll stop doing that. If where you're walking is causing people to turn away from faith in God, then you need to stop going in that direction and just cut your feet off. Because it's better to be crippled and maimed than to be thrown into Gehenna. The whole context here is how we treat people. The next 3 chapters, 18, 19, and 20, is all going to be about how we treat people. That's what he's talking about. He's created, from the beginning of Matthew, he's been talking about the kingdom's coming. And now they're saying, well, who's the greatest in the kingdom? And he says, well, look, let me explain to you what the kingdom's going to look like. The kingdom's about how we treat one another. The kingdom's not about positions of authority and Secretary of State and any of that kind of nonsense. The kingdom is about how you treat your fellow believers, how you treat other little ones, other disciples. And so the hand is what you do, the foot is where you go, the eye is how and what you see. So if what I'm doing is causing others to stumble, where I'm going, how I see, is causing others to stumble, I need to cut it out. Now, remember, this is not hurt feelings, okay? This is not, I had a lady tell me that those kids clapping in church is a stumbling block for her. No, it's not. It's just you don't like it. You're not, I had one gentleman when I was a youth minister, and I don't know, y'all find this hard to believe, but I can be a little bit smart mouth sometimes. And he said, it was, I think they were lifting their hands when they sang or something, the youth group was, and that was causing him to stumble. And so they should stop that. And I said, well, do I need to get the elders in here so that we can pray over you? Because, this if it's that great a sin, then I'm worried about your soul. Well, I'm not sinning. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not. Well, that's what you just said. You just said that you were sinning, that you were turning away from the faith. I didn't say anything. So there you go. So it's not hurt feelings. It's not being annoyed or offended. It is causing someone to lose faith in God, to lose trust in God, to turn away from the faith. And the bottom line there is millstones. So we have to be better. We have to build one another up. I'm almost out of time. But in verse 10, see that you not despise one of these little ones. We're still talking about disciples. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. That's a big one. We don't have time for that, but I'll put it in your head so you can be thinking about it. This is, okay, I'll leave you with that, verse 10, for you to ponder for the rest of the week. We'll come back to it next week. But here's what I want you to take with you as you're pondering this. This verse is not talking about guardian angels. So, now, that's the verse that they'll give you when they want to tell you that guardian angels exist. That's not what it's talking about. So, play with that, wrestle with that, meditate on that. I like to say marinate on that for the week. And we will come back next Sunday right here, and that's where we'll start. So thank you for your participation. You got about 15 minutes. Take care of your business, fellowship, say hi to one another, and be back in here at 10 for worship.